Sorry for all the delays. See if we can get this quick. Okie doke. Today we'll talk about layers for a little while. And layers are fundamentally probably one of the most important features in Photoshop. If you have your palettes open to the right, you should see a little button here that says layers. If you don't, then what you need to do is look under the window menu and under the layers and make sure that it becomes visible. And what I would do, if you do have the final project open from the lessons, then what I would like you to do is take the layers panel and drag it off so that it becomes separate from all of the others. And then what we can do is we can click on the bottom right-hand corner and drag down to see all of the layers that are a part of this final project. And before I talk about doing the project itself, I want to talk about layers and the layers panel. Now at the moment, you'll notice a number of features that are grayed out. We have modes, opacity, we can lock portions of the layer or the whole layer, and we have fill options here that are grayed out. We need a layer selected before any of those features are activated. To activate or highlight the layer, you simply just click on it, and that's it. You also have the ability to turn on and off the visibility of layers. If I want to take the word scrapbook and temporarily hide it, I can use the eye icon to the left, which indicates its visibility. That's what the little eye stands for, and you click on it and it hides it. It does not throw it away, it just simply turns it off and makes it invisible for the time being. And when you want to view it again, just turn it back on. It's that simple. You'll notice that you can have a whole bunch of layers here, and each of these elements in this particular illustration are all isolated on separate layers. And in the last exercise, when we made selections and we did the vegetables and that sort of thing, they were all on the same layer. This makes it much nicer because now they all work independent of one another. But at the same time, when you look at the final project, they function as a whole, as a single entity. Does that make sense? When I print this out, it doesn't print out as separate elements. It prints out as one unified piece. But if I want to move, for example, the word scrapbook, or I want to move this picture, I can select the photo. Now, it happens to be linked to the letter, and I can tell that by this little link, and we'll cover that shortly. And I can use the move tool, and when I move it, notice that they move in unison, and everything else remains put, stays put. So the move tool will be what you use to click on an element in a layer to move it. The other thing that we'll talk about in a moment is how to link layers together. They can be independent of one another, or you can have them work as a unit, and this can all be changed on the fly very easily. The stacking order is also important. Many Illustrator users in here, if I recall, there were a few people that had used Illustrator before. You should be used to working with objects, and objects, even if they're on the same layer, layered on top of one another. The same is true here. Anything that you see at the top is at the top of the stacking order. Anything at the bottom is at the bottom of the stacking order. It's like a deck of cards. This is the top of the stack, this is the bottom of the stack. By default, when you open a single image, it comes in as a background image. The background images are locked. At any time, if you want to move something behind that background image and hide part of it, you have to double click on the layer. And when you do, you'll notice it will now name it layer 0. And when it does, it becomes what is called a transparent layer. And you can move that background layer up and down. It's no longer fixed. So by selecting any one of these layers, let's also look at what we have under options up here. Now that I've selected any one of these layers, you'll see that we have something called modes. Modes can change the visibility or the way, the appearance of these objects, the images on a particular layer, quite significantly. I can select darken, and you'll notice what it does. It takes whatever pixels, I can't remember now, but when you, each of these modes will take dark versus light pixels or color versus gray pixels, and it combines them with all the layers, with all the elements beneath it. And you can see that it changes the look quite significantly of this letter by selecting darken. If I select normal, that's how it looks. If I select multiply, for example, it looks a little different than darken. It's actually taking some of the pixels and combining them with the others, and others will subtract pixels, and so on and so forth. So just by changing modes, you can change the appearance quite significantly of a particular object on a layer. And it doesn't alter the original in any way. You can always come back and change it back to its normal state. The other thing that you can do with layers, yes?
What is the name of that menu, the drop-down menu?
It's called modes. And I know that there's a mathematical explanation for these, and I have listened to them again and again and again. And it's a way it combines light and dark pixels and color pixels with the layers underneath. And when it says darken, it takes all the dark pixels, it only takes the dark pixels and adds them to whatever pixels are underneath that are dark, and darkens it, or it subtracts them, or it does a lot of things. I just, quite frankly, don't understand, and I don't care. Because I can never figure out what it's going to look like, or anticipate what most of them are going to look like anyway. I use them kind of by rote or by example. And if I know, okay, in this particular instance, I really want this to look somewhat transparent, because I know that the white, that's what it's going to do with the white, the lighter pixels, and I still have an indication that this letter is here, then that's what I want to use. And that's different from changing opacity, which I'll get to in a minute. We can also take each layer and we can control the opacity of this layer. And remember, everything that I'm doing here is continually editable. You can constantly change it depending on what your likes or dislikes are, or what works and what doesn't work. So if I change the opacity to 50%, notice how it looks a little different than what changing the mode to multiply looks. It still makes it transparent, but the color of it looks a little bit different. Something I forgot to mention. Anybody notice what time I started? It's 1:04 right now. I've been going about 10 minutes.
Right before lunch.
Okay, would you let me know when about half hour is up? Thank you. So you'll hear this on this too, because I'm not going to edit this out. Okay, so we have the mode, we have the opacity. We can also lock the layers in different ways. We can lock transparency. We can lock the painting mode. We can lock the movement of a particular layer, and we can lock the entire layer. So if I have the layer selected, and by default, transparency is locked and is selected. I mean, not by default, but that's what they had here in the final version. If if I wanted everything locked, I could just click this and it locks that whole layer. So now when I select the letter layer, select the move tool, and I try to move it, it won't. If I try to paint on top of it, it won't. It locks it, so it protects it. And again, that's something that we can go back and change. I can unlock it and I can go back to what I had before. And what does it do to protect the transparency? This is like a built-in mask. It's very cool. This is the letter. The letter only occupies the space of the letter, and everything around it is transparent. So if I click on a drag, notice that it paints just on the letter, and anything outside of it is left protected. That's what protect transparency means. If I select the painted, protect the painted part, then when I click in here, oops, it's going to protect all of this for the time being. Movement, let's go back and change that. Try again. No, it's not going to do. Why not? Let's try that. Huh? I want to just lock the painted mode, and that's it. Well, these are locked too. So let me try again. No, let me lock and unlock these. Why not? When I paint here, it paints on everything, because I don't have anything selected. If I lock move, now I can no longer move. If I go back and unlock the painted part, let me go back, let me just pick the background as an example. No, because that's all locked. Why can't I do it? How about the paper texture? No, I just want to lock this. How about if I unlink it for the time being, and I unlock the painted part? Okay, now I'm going to lock the painted part. So I select paint, or something that I want to draw or paint on. It doesn't have to be paint brush tool. And select, what is this thing? I have black again selected. Won't allow me to paint on any part of it. I'm going to have to come back. I'm wasting time. Let me go back again and select these two layers, and since they do need to be linked together, I will link them. Okay, about selecting multiple layers. Let's move on to that, because I unlinked the photo layer and the letter layer. How do I select two at the same time? There's two ways of doing it. I can hold down the Shift key and select both. And now I can select the link tool, and that links those layers together as they were when I opened it. What if I wanted to select the shell layer, as an example, and I wanted to select the letter layer as well? If I hold down the Shift key and do that, watch what happens. It selects all three layers from top to bottom. I didn't want to do that. If I want to select the shell layer and just the letter layer, then I select the Command key, Apple key, and that, whoops, I don't want to do that either. That's another thing I need to do. Hold down the Command key, select the layer, and now notice that each independent layer is selected. Does that make sense? I'm stumbling here. That's the Command key. So if you want to select multiple layers, hold down the Shift key, select the first and the last. If you want to select non-contiguous layers, hold down the Command key, click on each layer, and select or deselect them as you like. Okay? If you wish to turn a layer or whatever element of it on into a selection, that's what I did by mistake. Is that, for example, what if I want to select the shell? Notice the shell, if I select the Move tool, is a silhouette of that object, and I want to make a selection. If I click on the icon, oh, come on. How hard is it? If I click on the icon, never mind. If I hold down the Shift key, okay, if I hold down the Command key, there we go. There are a handful of keys that work, and you try enough of them, and you got it figured out. The Shift, Option, and Command key are really key to most of your selection. So, again, to make that selection, hold down the Command key and select the icon, and notice that you see the marching ants around the shell. Command V to deselect. Okay, so to select the layer, you click here. If you want to select multiple layers, don't click on the icon as I did, because notice how it changes. You see the little change where it says layer thumbnail. When you click on the thumbnail with the Command key, it turns it into a selection. When I just click on the layer with the Command key, notice how it selects the multiple layers. Now, fill pertains to when we paint, and it works like transparency, but it's not quite the same. So if I change the fill, let's leave it at 100% first, and I'll pick the shell layer, and I'll pick some paint here, and the paintbrush, black paint. And when I paint, notice that it paints opaque, 100%. However, if I select the fill of that layer to 50%, now notice what it does to the shell. Now when I paint on it, notice that when I paint, it's 50%. So it does, in many ways, work somewhat like transparency. Okay. You'll also notice that any type that we use will reside on its own layer. That's what the T stands for each of these layer icons here, or the previews. And if you've used the type, any type at all, it should show over here, for example, the word scrapbook. It lets you know this is the type scrap. The letter 3, you'll notice that the 3 here. The show is named because that's not type, it's the name of an image that we have on that layer. All of the other layers were named. Now, how do you name the layers? Select the layer and double-click on the type itself. And you'll notice that the type highlights. I can go in and I can type whatever I want. If I want to call it my shell, you can name it whatever you want. But with type, it automatically names them, and I wouldn't change the name of them, because again, when you have multiple layers with different type on it, you're going to want to be able to select it and identify it rather quickly. In order to do that, it will let you know what the first words are in the sentence. Even if it's a multiple line text, it will let you know what the first few words are, so you can identify it more readily. And that, again, can be changed as much as you like. Let's jump to the bottom, and you'll notice I've already used the link tool. To link layers together, you need to select them, and you need a minimum of 2 layers. And you'll notice that they're not currently linked. I mean, these two are linked, but the top and bottom are not. If I wish to link all of them together, I click the little chain icon. To unlink them, you click it again and it unlinks them. But notice that it unlinks them all now. So if I need to go back to these 2 layers and select them and relink them, I can. And when you link layers together, again, it affects, when you move one, the other one moves. If you scale one, they both scale. So for example, if I hit Command P for transform, I hold down the Shift key to constrain, and I want to make both of them smaller and both of them keep their relative distance to one another, size relation to one another. And that's the way to do that. And if you want to change that afterwards, then just unlink the layers. The next layer pertains, the next button down at the bottom, Effects to Effects. And there are any number of effects that we can apply to a specific layer. And you'll notice that some, and you'll see the little abbreviation effects next to the right has been applied to any number of layers here. To find out what some of them are, we can click the little button to the right, and it allows us to close it or open it up so we can see what effects have been applied to each of the layers. So this just helps you conserve on real estate a little bit. If I want to see where it's been applied to the word scrapbook, you'll see that there are 3 effects that have been applied. There is a drop shadow, a bevel and emboss, and a color overlay. These are really very powerful, and sometimes it's difficult to decide when to stop using them. It really requires exhibiting some restraint on your part, not to go overboard with the effects. But as an example, if I want to change the drop shadow, I just simply double click on that if I've already applied it. And you'll see that here is the drop shadow effect layer. And I can change the distance, I can change the size, I can change the color, I can change any number of things pertaining to this. Pretty cool. And it can be done very quickly. If you wish to add a new layer or a new effect, make sure the layer is selected. Select the little effects button, and you'll notice that there's any number of features that we can select here. If I want a pattern overlay, or if I want a satin finish, or an outer glow for my type, and then it will bring that dialog box up. Now I can change, and it can do some very strange things if I'm not careful. And as soon as I've added that, notice I've added that outer glow. And if I wish to turn any of these effects on and off, I can do. So each of the effects also, in addition to the layers, has an individual little eye icon that controls the visibility of it. And if any of these eye icons or visibility icons are turned off, when you print, it will not print. So it's very easy to create multiple versions of a document without having to create separate documents. Does that make sense? You just turn layers on and off, and you can create any number of versions of an item that you like. If you want to throw away a layer, or you want to throw away an effect layer, you click on the layer and drag it to the trash can to the right. There's also, to the right of the effects, we have something called layer masks. And we are not using layer masks in this particular assignment, but they will become very important. It will be a way of isolating a part of the image and at the same time not destroy the rest of the image that we're not using. Does that make sense? So we're going to allow only part of that image to become visible, but at the same time, we did that with a tie on the very first exercise. That's sort of, it's not a layer mask, but it's the same principle. We also have some important controls here. These are adjustment layers. These, on one of the recent exercises that we did, we adjusted levels, we adjusted color balance, we adjusted all those things. We can adjust those for individual layers as well. So what I can do is I can select, maybe I want to select the shell, and all the layers beneath that shell I want to affect as well. I can use, let's go ahead and select levels here as an example. And I can adjust it, and I want everything to become darker. And I click OK. Notice what happens when you use an adjustment level, that it appears as a level by itself, or a layer by itself on here. So at any time if I want to turn off that effect, I can by turning the visibility icon on and off. I can also go back and I can change the settings of that by double clicking, and it has the last settings that I use. So if I want to darken it further, lighten it, change any of the other features in here. Maybe I find this look more appealing by just changing the midtones, and I click OK. This too makes it nice when you use any, instead of using up here, when I go to adjustments, because once I use the adjustments here under the image menu, These are permanent changes that are hard to go back and reset back to the original condition. These, on the other hand, can be thrown away, or they display the last settings that I chose. Yes?
How did you create that? Did you just start a new layer?
You click Adjustment Layers and then select which one you want. And then if I want to select Hue Saturation, for example, notice a dialog box that comes up, and when it does, and I make the changes to hue, notice it's changing all of the layers, not including the one that I selected, but the one, everything beneath it, it will affect. So that would be a way to change the overall look of this, to change the colors. And at the same time, if I want another version that has a different look, I can do that by just simply turning off them. Now, there's a way of controlling this so that it affects only that particular layer beneath it, not all the others. But that we will get to on another day. Throw it away, throw it in the trash. Yes, Roberto, have a question?
I was going to say, once you open up adjustment layers, you can move it up and down wherever you want to do it.
You're correct. Here, let me show you now. Might as well, since I've kind of gone off on that tangent. What if I want to affect color balance only on the shell layer? I can select the shell layer and go to Image, Adjustments. Actually, what do I want to do? I want to go to Layer, and I want to select New Adjustment Layer. And then I will select, I said, color balance, so I'll select color balance. But this time, what I'll do is I'll say use previous layer to create clipping mask. So I'll click OK, and now it does. So when I do that, and I make the adjustments, watch what happens. It's just the shell that's affected, nothing else. See how by changing from red to cyan, just the shell is affected and nothing else? That can be really, really very helpful. And again, when I go back, I have this adjustment layer that I use from here, but went about it slightly differently. And it doesn't affect all the layers beneath it, it only affects the single layer beneath it. And again, I can turn it on and off. I can double click and I can go back and change the colors again. Or I can go away.
So if you click on that layer, then it'll only affect that one layer. But if you don't have any of the layers selected, it just pops up.
Well, in order to use the adjustment layer here, you have to have a layer selected. But when you use it from here, it affects all the layers beneath it. On the other hand, if I only want the adjustment layer to affect that one layer, I need to do it from up here by selecting the layer, new adjustment layer, select, for starters, which one I want, brightness and contrast, and then click here, use previous layer to create clipping mask. Then it will only affect the one layer beneath it. See how I can affect the brightness and contrast. And it just, again, affects the shell layer, and that's it. If I want to throw it away, I throw it away. The next icon, the one adjacent to the adjustment layer, it looks like a little folder, and that's exactly what it is. You can group layers together in a folder. And later on we'll do that, because you'll see that it can get, that more layers you add, it gets pretty cumbersome. So it allows you to group them and to store them in little folders within there. If you want to create a brand new blank layer, select wherever you want the layer to be above. Okay, so if I want to create a new layer immediately above the shell layer, I select the shell layer, and I click this little icon. It says create a new layer, and boom, it adds a brand new empty layer onto which I can place a new image, I can paint, I can put type, or you don't need to put type, because type automatically adds in on its own layer. Do what I want. And then the last one, the one that I've already used, is the trash can. The trash can allows you to throw layers away, or effects layers, or adjustment layers. If I want to throw the shell layer away, I simply click and drag it in the trash can. What if I want to make a duplicate of the shell layer? I can do that too. That's another function of create a new layer. If I select the shell layer and I drag it on top of create a new layer, notice it makes a copy of it directly on top of the previous one. And now when I click on a drag, I have a duplicate. So you can create multiple images very, very quickly. So if you want shell copy, you can leave it named that. It also includes the effects, so you can also throw it away.
Can you get a layer back after you throw it away?
You have your history panel, and you have one undo. Otherwise, you would have to recreate it from scratch. You'd have to create a new layer, or as we see in this exercise, there are different ways of approaching it. Yes.
30 minutes.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to stop this right now. This will be the time to take a break. And then I'm going to come back, and I've given you the grand tour of layers. And now I'll come back